I'm really grateful to be here with you. I remember when this building was built and the generosity of people like Tim LaHaye and so on who put this up. And I think it was partly the vision of Jeff Lilly, wasn't it, too? You have a great history, and you guys are part of it. It's ongoing history. I was asked to come and share about evangelism and about sharing our faith. And I want you to know from the outset, I do not have the gift of evangelism. I have it as a high value, as I think every Christian should have. And so I'm going to be sharing more out of my mistakes that I've made and out of the things that I've learned also. So I think we can learn from successes as well. I will also, all of my talks this week, lace them with personal stories of people I led to Christ or maybe people I didn't lead to Christ. So I want you to know that I'm not talking to you about some subject out there, but something that I have been deeply involved with all of my Christian life. Since the first week that I became a Christian, the first people I saw come to faith were 2 days after I became a Christian. But we'll talk more about that later. But I want to begin with a word of prayer. Gracious Heavenly Father, I worship you for the privilege of being with these young men and women who you deeply love. I worship you that we could be here and we could consider something so great as the fact that you have a mission for the world and you have involved us with purpose in that mission. And we're grateful. We feel privileged by it. I pray, Father, for each one of the students here that they would learn much that would help them as they build on what they learn and practice sharing their faith the rest of their days. I also pray, Father, that you would take the words that I offer and use them. I know, Lord, that I'm just a pea brain. I also know, Father, that none of us knows very much, given all there is to know. But help us to maximize the use of what we know for your glory. And the next thing, Father, I know I'm sitting in front of a room full of people, everyone who has unique challenges in his or her heart, struggles they're going through, conundrums, things they don't understand, joys they have, and all kinds of cares and so on. How is it possible that one person could speak in front of a group of people and think that what he says is going to connect with every heart unless you're involved in the transaction? And once your son took something like crumbs, 5 loaves and 2 fish, and he blessed them and multiplied them, and a multitude of people left satisfied. Would your Holy Spirit please do something like that for us this evening and take the crumbs that are offered and bless them and distribute them so that each person would sense that he or she got something specific that spoke to his or her heart. Knowing then, Father, the affirmation of your individual love for each one sitting here. We ask this to happen in our midst this day for Christ's sake. Amen. So I want to start with a question. Why don't we share Christ with people? Why is the church so deficient in America in making the gospel known? The statistics are abysmal. What do you think is behind that?
Fear.
Yeah. Say it loud. My hearing aids, somehow they got broke on the plane or something.
I said fear.
Fear?
Yes.
Okay. Fear of what?
Fear of man.
Fear of man. I'm coming back to that one in a minute. Anybody else? What's your name, by the way?
My name's Kara.
Kara. What do you got?
Fear of rejection.
Fear of rejection. Okay, that's good.
I think the Western church has gotten so caught up in having a personal relationship with Christ that they forget that it's our duty to share the gospel with others rather than keep it.
They've gotten so caught up with having a personal relationship with Christ, so we shouldn't have a personal relationship with him?
They've gotten so caught up in having a personal relationship with just them and God, and they forget about
The world outside of them.
Yes.
That's a good insight. That's good. Yeah, they maybe think it's just individual and not a corporate responsibility.
Yeah.
That's good. Anybody else?
They don't know how.
They don't know how. Who said it? They don't know how. Yeah. Willing hearts, but they don't know how. That's interesting. Anybody else? Yes.
They're complacent in their own little bubble. Like all the people they know are Christians, and they are just like in that.
Yeah, they live, it's a little insular. Their life is a little bit insular. Yeah. Wow, that's good. These are good insights, actually. So, anybody else? I think the thing about we don't know how, if you don't know how, you can go out and try. You know, I think all of us are basically awkward. You know, a toddler learning how to walk falls down and gets bruised. A 5-year-old taking the training wheels off the two-wheeler falls down and gets abrasions. An adolescent learning how to skateboard gets a sprained ankle, maybe a broken wrist. Remember when you guys were in that one schoolroom experience in elementary school, and then you went to middle school, the most purgatorial period of human development? And you were going to try and figure out how to navigate 6 classrooms and a locker that never seemed to work. Remember that? Then you were a senior in high school and you could have done it blindfolded, right? But you were awkward. When you first came here to Joshua, you were a little bit awkward. You're getting to know new people, a new environment. When you get married, you're going to feel awkward at first. When you have children, you're going to feel really awkward. All of these things, I don't think any of us was very life skilled, and if you waited until you weren't awkward, you would never do anything. So consequently, you lean into the awkwardness and you learn skill by doing it. And learn from your mistakes. You know, I've had people say to me, oh yeah, I shared Christ, it went horrible. I'm never doing that again. They would never say that. You know, I came home the first week after being married, getting back from the honeymoon, it was a little bit awkward, so I'm not doing this marriage thing anymore. You know, I went to work, I got a new job, and it didn't go so well that day, so nuts to those people, I'm never going back to work. We don't do that in any other area of our life. Why do we do it in evangelism? It's interesting to me. So that's a good point. You just learn. If nobody's mentored, it's best to be mentored. If nobody's mentored you, say, this is such a high value. I'm going to do this and I'm going to learn from my mistakes. That's basically what happened with me, though I did have people who mentored me some too. Okay, but I want to get to the fear one. So one time I was talking to a young woman who was captain of the women's softball team at Wheaton College, and I said to her, why do you think people don't share? And she said, I think we're afraid of what people will think of us. We're afraid of what people will think of us. And I said to her, wow, if I'm more afraid of what people are going to think about me than I am concerned about what God thinks about me who loves me, then maybe I'm a bit of an idolater. Because I'm making what those people think about me more important than what God thinks about me. I have a group of faculty at Wheaton College, and we do life together. You need to always, I think, have a small group of people around you. The secrets you can't talk about, they control you. You need to have people you can let your guard down with, and so on. And these are guys who are in my life that way. One of them is a theater professor at Wheaton College. His name's Mark Lewis. Mark was born in Argentina. He was the 8th born child in a missional family. And all of his siblings were missional. He was the only one who was an artist. And his dad, who was a good guy, I met his dad, but his dad was on the rigid end of fundamentalism, you know, the rigid end of evangelicalism, so on. Good guy, but he was pretty narrow in his focus. And Mark was an artist. And his dad had no room for him. He didn't understand art, and so he just sort of marginalized him. Mark, whenever I go someplace, if I find marbles, I buy marbles for Mark. Because Mark said that when he was young, his dad always had a bunch of marbles up on the top shelf in a jar. And he longed to have his dad get the marbles and come down and play marbles with him. His dad never did. So Mark collects marbles to try and connect with that part of his father he never really knew. Well, anyway, Mark went on to become a great actor. He was on Broadway, actor on Broadway. He was in the soap operas. Matter of fact, when he came to teach at Wheaton College, Soap Opera Digest did a retrospect of past soap operas. He was on the cover of Soap Opera Digest as a professor at Wheaton College. It's crazy. But he told me when he was young, he wanted to communicate to his parents how much he loved them. So he spent the day using his artistic ability when he was about 6 years old, painting a mural up the back white wall of their house. He got out his crayons, his felt tip markers, his paints, and he's the whole time thinking, when Dad and Mom see this, they're finally going to say, wow, look what Mark did for us. Look how beautiful this is. This is great. He imagined him bringing in neighbors and saying, look what Mark did for us. Look how much he loves us. Didn't quite go that way when his parents came home. He got spanked. And he said the sad thing for him wasn't that he got spanked, but that his parents didn't see what he was trying to communicate to them. You fast forward many years later, Mark was directing the autumn play at Wheaton. He'd get up in the morning, help his wife with the 5 kids, get ready for the day. He would go to class. He would teach some classes. He would grade some papers. He would go to faculty governance meetings. He would meet with students with student appointments. And then he would come home for about an hour to get dinner and rest before he had to direct the rehearsal for that night. And after about 3 weeks of this, he was pretty weary for these long days. And when he came home, he was relaxing just before dinner, and his daughter Ruby, who was 6, was standing at the sink with a plastic basin in the sink and the water going full bore and water going all over the place. And Mark gets up and he says, he's thinking, I got to clean this mess up. I came home for rest. He says, Ruby, honey, what are you doing? And Ruby bursts into tears. And Mark's wife says to Ruby, she knew you were weary. She was just getting a basin of water so she could wash your feet. And Mark immediately remembered his own 6-year-old experience. And he said, oh, Ruby, honey, I am so sorry. Let me help you. He said it was the coldest water he ever put his feet in his life. He said, but you know, my folks didn't get it right. I got it half right. Maybe one day Ruby will get it all right. Why does that story move us so much? Because we've all been the one whose good intention was misjudged. And we've also been the one who misjudged another person's good intention. And then also, fast forward many years later, did any of you ever hear of the book Blue Like Jazz by Donald Miller? Okay, it used to be the thing, Christian campuses, everybody was reading it. And he had a sequel called Learning,
A million
huh?
miles. No, it's probably
Searching for God Knows What. Okay? And in that book, Miller tells a story that when he was in high school, he longed to be in the center of the social set that he was at school, but he was always on the fringe. And one day he was at home and he read a poem and he liked the poem, so he memorized it. Searching for God Knows What's the title of that book. He memorized this poem, and about 2 weeks later, somebody at school said something, and he said, oh, that reminds me of a poem. And he recited the poem from memory. And they said, Miller, you are smart. Wow, you are really smart. He said it was the first time he ever felt good about himself. And 2 things happened as a result. One, he started memorizing a lot of poetry after that. And number 2, he realized he needed to gain a sense of himself based on how others looked at him. And everybody he was looking to, he realized, was as insecure as he was. Our fears grow out of our own insecurities. And I think when it comes to evangelism, we can be more worried about what other people think about us than what God who loves us thinks about us. And God is the one who alone has perfect love that casts out fear. And I want to spend some time looking at this, because if I am not convinced that God loves me, my guess is I'm going to drag my feet when it comes to telling other people that God loves them. So I want you to draw on the rich well of God's love for you Understand what that love is like so it spills over the top of you when you share with other people. I grew up in a church experience and I didn't know God loved me. I was told that the church I grew up at, if I went to a movie and Jesus came back while I was in the theater, he'd just let me go to hell. I was told if I had a perfect life, lived a perfect life, but had one bad thought the last second of my life, I'd go to hell forever. I was told that in a Sunday school class. So I deduced if I could lose what I had with God based on what I did, I had to gain what I had with God based on what I did. And I never saw the good of that. I remember when Walt Disney's Shaggy Dog came out, I desperately wanted to go see it, but didn't know if it was worth risking my eternal destiny to go see that movie. And the neighbor lady, Mrs. Greenlee, came down and asked my mom if I could go with her boys to see that movie. And I'm looking at my mom with ambivalence. I want to go on one end, scared stiff on the other. My mom said I could go, and I began to wonder if she really loved me that she'd put my life in such eternal peril, you see. So you have these fears, and I didn't know that God loved me. But boy, when I found out my freshman year in college, my older brother took me to Campus Crusade for Christ meeting. They call it Cru now. First week I was in college. And I heard that God loved me. I didn't know he loved me. I heard he forgave me. And I knew I was a sinner. There was no doubt in my mind. When I thought I could lose my salvation based on what I did, and I had to gain it based on what I did, I knew I could never be good enough to go to heaven. So I got in all kinds of trouble. I was always in trouble. And I just thought I'm going to hell anyway. I might as well have a good time. I didn't get involved in sexual things because I had a girlfriend who dumped me for an older guy. He took advantage of her, and I said, when guys do this to women, it's wrong. But I was violent. I grew up in South Central Los Angeles. I was in fights all the time. I carried a gun to high school. It was stupid, just stupid. My frontal lobe wasn't fully developed. And there were a lot of bad things I did. I knew I was a sinner. I didn't know God could love me. And that night I heard. And I just wanted everybody to know. There's forgiveness in Christ. He loves us unconditionally. How great is his love? This great. I don't think God has ever stopped loving Satan. And the reason why I say that is that Satan's incorrigibility does not diminish God's character. God is love. Satan can't prevent that, but Satan can reject it, and he has, and he's a tragedy because so much love that is available to him, he rejects. And if I'm worried more about what other people think about me and letting fear keep me from sharing Christ with other people, I need to lather up in the riches of that love that is unconditional, always going my way. But we need to talk about it, right? Let's see if we can develop this a little bit more. I want to take you to a text of Scripture, 1 John 3, 1 through 3. It's my favorite passage in the New Testament. And I want to affirm by this his love for you before we then start talking about how to tell other people about his love. Again, how many of you have ever seen a grandmother pull out pictures of her grandkids? How many of you have been grossly offended when she does that? You were grossly offended when a grandmother pulled out pictures of children to show her grandchildren?
Oh, my grandma does it to me. It's low-key embarrassing.
But what do you know about that?
But she loves me.
She loves you. How many are grossly offended when somebody starts talking about a sports team they like or tells you about their boyfriend or girlfriend? You're grossly offended? Well, the thing is, generally we don't get offended when people talk about what they love. Evelyn Underhill, the philosopher of religion in England, she was a brilliant woman. Most of my academic life is on C.S. Lewis, but I got into Underhill because she was about 35 years older than Lewis, but she wrote a letter to Lewis, and he wrote her back and said, receiving that letter from you was the greatest literary experience of my life. Underhill was an eminent, she was the first woman given university-wide lecture status at Oxford University. Before her, women could only teach women. But she was so eminent, nobody could shut her out. And she wrote to Lewis, yeah. Huh? I'm going to walk over because my ears are bad.
Did you know C.S. Lewis?
Did I know him?
Yeah.
He died when I was 13.
Oh, okay.
But his son is a friend. His son is a friend.
Okay.
Whenever his son comes to Chicago, he stays with us. And I've had meals with a couple of Tolkien's kids too. So, and I know a lot of people who were connected with Lewis. Yeah. But I didn't know him. So anyway, where was I on this story? Evelyn Underhill. She once said, good teaching is one person loving something publicly. Good evangelism is one person loving someone publicly. Both the person you're sharing about and the person you're sharing with. Okay, so let's talk about the love of God then. 1 John 3, 1 through 3. See how great a love the Father has bestowed upon us that we should be called children of God. And such we are. For this reason the world does not know us because it did not know him. Beloved, now we are children of God. And it has not appeared as yet what we shall be, but we know that when he appears, we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is. Almost my entire adult life has been working with college students. I was a college pastor and a college football coach for many years. Then I went into teaching full-time, and I was a college professor for 25 years. And I've worked with college students, and every time I talk about the love of God the Father, I'll always get somebody who has difficulty with that concept because they have a bad father experience. And yet for every 10 people that I've seen that had a bad father experience, one kind of rejects the concept of God as Father, and the other 9 gravitate towards it like a duck to water because they long to have the Father vacuum filled. So the scriptures say that the sins of the parents are visited on the children of the 3rd and 4th generation. It says that 4 times in the Old Testament in the Pentateuch as the children of Israel were getting ready to begin their national life. And it's given as a warning. But lest you feel bad that you had a bad parental experience and you think this stuff's going to leach down to me and it's going to go to my kids too, you've got twice mentioned in the Old Testament that just because the fathers eat sour grapes, it doesn't necessarily mean the children's teeth will be set on edge. In other words, those verses come at the end of Israel's national life before they go into Babylonian captivity, and their national light is flickering and about ready to go out, and it's spoken as a word of hope. There's still hope. So in light of that, years ago, I was reading a devotional by a guy named Thomas Fuller. He was a 17th century British pastor. And he did a devotion one time on the genealogy of Jesus in Matthew chapter 1. I don't know about you, but if a person has time to do a genealogy devotional, they've got too much time on their hands, right? But listen to what he wrote in light of this thing about sins of the parents are visited, but they don't have to necessarily affect us. Lord, I find the genealogy of my Savior strangely checkered with 4 remarkable changes in 4 immediate generations. 1, Rehoboam begat Abiah, that is, a bad father begat a bad son. 2, Abiah begat Asa, that is, a bad father, a good son. 3, Asa begat Jehoshaphat, that is, a good father, a good son. 4, Jehoshaphat begat Joram, that is, a good father, a bad son. I see, Lord, from hence that my father's piety cannot be handed on. And that's bad news for me. But I see also that actual impiety is not always hereditary, and that is good news for my son. I don't know about you, but I love the honesty and tenderness of that. All of us have fathers. Even if they were good fathers, none of them were perfect. All of us who are fathers know that we haven't always gotten it right. But there's one Father who always gets it right. And oh, people, I want you to know this about him. He loves you. He loves you. He loves you. In this text, John, who's an old man by the time he writes it, some people think he might have been in his 90s. He's grabbing us by the lapels or probably by the toga, right? And he's shaking us and he's saying, I want you to know he loves you. So let's see how it develops it. It says in the text that when he appears, we shall be like him. We're never going to be like Christ in his deity. You're never going to be an uncreated person. It's too late for that. You're never going to be omnipotent and all-powerful and rivals for his power. You're never going to be all-knowing. You're going to be like him in perfected humanity, not like him in his deity. But one day, we will be perfected humanity. I don't know about you. I can't wait for that day. I can't wait for all this sin to finally be leached out, to finally not judge people, to finally assume the best of people, to finally not screw up anymore. I don't know about you, but I long for that day. And one day it's coming. I can't wait, too, to get to heaven. I wonder what it's going to be like. I have a real close friend, and we've been debating this for 40 years, what our first word will be when we get to heaven. I went to Talbot Seminary at Biola, and he went to Gordon Seminary, so what does he know, in Massachusetts? But nevertheless, he always says that he thinks our first word when we get to heaven, it's going to be, oh. Oh, now I see why that person I cared for so much broke up with me and it broke my heart so horrible. Or that person I cared for never even noticed me. Oh, now I see why our family went through that horrible financial crisis and it led to such great difficulty. Oh, now I see why my folks divorced. Oh, now I see why that person I cared for so deeply died so suddenly. Oh, Lord, now that I've arrived here, I get it. Oh. It's not bad. I think he's wrong. Remember, he went to Gordon. What does he know? I think the first word we're going to say when we get to heaven is going to be, wow! Wow! I had no idea. I didn't know that, Lord. Oh, my heavens. If you know 0 to 100 bits about the infinite God, how much more is there still to know? An infinite amount. If you know 0 to 1,000 bits, how much more is there still to know? An infinite amount. If you know 0 to 1 billion bits, how much more is there still to know? You will never get to the bottom of him. You will never get to the bottom of his love, his grace, his mercy, his kindness. I think every moment in heaven we're going to say, and I didn't know that either. And wow, I didn't know that either. It's going to be full of wonder. G.K. Chesterton said, the world will never starve for want of wonders, only for want of wonder. And the governor that's on your sense of wonder right now, it will be eradicated and you will live in perpetual sense of wonder and awe and worship. Wow. Now, I could be wrong. Maybe we'll say, oh, wow. Maybe it'll go something like that. But I don't know. But nevertheless, one day, it's all going to be fixed. It's all going to be fixed. I long for that day. But what about now, when it's not fixed? When we still struggle? When we sometimes don't get it right? When even our best efforts are not enough? And even our best intentions are not understood. And even our friends who are looking to us, we don't always understand their best interest. What about now? Look what the text says. Beloved, now, broken as we are, messed up as we are, beloved, now we are children of God. Do you see how great that love is? Let me see if I can illustrate it. We have 4 kids. They're all married. We have 15 grandkids. I have to start saving up for Christmas around March. My wife and I have decided, you know, if we had to do it, we would not make the house payment that month of December in order to buy the grandkids presents. We'll move into a tent or something like that. Grandkids win. But nevertheless, our children, when they were growing up, you know, you try to be a responsible parent. You go to seminars, you read books, you have your first child, and nothing you heard about in the seminar really applies to them. They're so different. So you try and figure that out, and then you have a second child, and the second child's completely different than the first one. Then you have the third and the fourth, and you're just going, how do we do this parent thing? It's a lot of work. We decided we had to come up with a system for discipline. This is what we came up with. We would never discipline our kids for something they didn't know was inappropriate. And so my kids were creative. They were always coming up with new things. We had to tell them, no, that's not appropriate. That's not appropriate. But when it came time to discipline them, we would say to them, what did we tell you not to do? And they'd say, you told me not to play in the street, Dad. What did I see you doing? I was playing in the street, Dad. What did I say I would do if you played in the street? You said you'd spank me, Dad. Now, if our kids did something that was not of risk to life and limb, they had a timeout. And they had a timeout for as many minutes as they were years old. So 4 minutes for a 4-year-old gives new meaning to the word eternal. But if they did something that could risk life or limb, then they'd be spanked. So I'd say, what did I say I would do? You said, you'd spank me, Daddy. Do you think I love you any less because you did that? No, Dad, you don't love me any less. Is there anything you could ever do that would make me stop loving you? No, Dad, nothing. And then I'd administer my loving kindness to their hindquarters. And I would never dismiss them and say, go to your room now. Never, never. I would always take them in my arms and hug them till they were happy again. You know what my kids did 100% of the time when they were disciplined? They'd turn around like that for the hug. With my boys, it was no problem. But I have a daughter. And every orifice on her face would leak. Her eyes would leak. Her nose would leak. Her mouth would drool. And I'm tempted to say, you know what, I've got that hug for you, but first go take a shower first and come back and it'll be ready for you. But that would have communicated something I didn't want to communicate. So I'd take her in my arms. She'd put her head on my shoulder and leave evidence of her DNA all over my clothes. And I learned at that moment, every father who loves a child bears the stain because he loves the child. And this Father who loves you so much didn't wait till you had it together. God proved his love for you, and that while you were yet sinners, Christ died for you. Let me put it in another venue. I was a youth pastor, college pastor, when we were having our kids. And youth pastors don't make a lot of money. Are you a youth pastor? No. So we were going through those childbearing years. And my wife hated maternity clothes. And it was different getting maternity clothes when we were younger. Because they always sold maternity clothes, not in a cutesy maternity shop, but it was in some dark corner of some women's department store, like they were ashamed they even sold this stuff. And so my wife had a couple maternity outfits. She borrowed maternity outfits from others, and there was this sort of maternity wardrobe that went around our church. I remember one time walking up down the aisle of the church after a service was over, and I put my arm around this blonde woman, and I looked over, and it wasn't my wife. She was in my wife's maternity clothes, but it wasn't her. You know, there you go. So anyway, Claudia always wanted to have a couple of new outfits when she finally got out of that maternity stuff that she hated. When she could finally look down and see her feet again, she wanted a new outfit. Have you ever seen a new mother with a new outfit, with a new baby, where the new baby and the new outfit are in any way compatible. No. The mother nurses the baby. She puts a diaper on her shoulder. Does the baby burp in the diaper? No, all over the clothes. But every mother who loves her child bears the stain because she loves the child. Do you get it? That's the kind of love that God has for you. Is that love enough to be transformative for us? The last verse of this passage says, everyone who has this hope fixed upon him, the hope that though we're not like him yet, one day we'll be like him. The hope that when we see him, he will love us unconditionally as he loves us unconditionally now. And that even though now, when we don't have it all together, he still loves us. Everyone who has this hope fixed upon him purifies himself just as he is pure. How's that work? My dad was a Marine during World War II. He was in 3 D-Day invasions in the South Pacific. He was in the first wave to go ashore at Tarawa. It was the bloodiest battle of World War II for the amount of real estate gain and life lost. We sent in 5,000 Marines in the first assault in an island that was the size of the parking lot of the Pentagon. We sent in 30,000 in all. The beach he went in at, 1,500, went in on that beach. It was the one where they misjudged the tides and a bunch of guys drowned because they couldn't get the landing craft over the reef, and the guys jumped off and they went in the water with all their gear and they drowned. From the time he got dropped off till he finally got to the beach took 4 hours. And by the time he got to the beach, of the 1,500 that were on his beach, only 200 able bodies were left. His commanding officer told him, my father with 7 other Marines, take this flamethrower and take out that bunker. Because that bunker held them down. It was a bunker that went the width of the beach. They had a pier here with machine gun nests and a wharf with machine gun nests, and they went into a U of fire. The other 7 Marines were killed, and he was the last one with the flamethrower and took out that bunker. And I said, Dad, what was it like? He's hearing the screams. And here's what he told me. My thought was, the mothers of those boys won't be getting letters from those boys anymore. Who has that level of sensitivity in the cacophony of battle? He went in on D-Day at Saipan. It happened 9 days after D-Day in Normandy, and we lost 3,000 more Americans in Saipan than we lost in Normandy. Nobody goes to Saipan because you can go to Normandy and then go to Paris or London or something like that. But I went to see Saipan. I wanted to see where my dad fought. He was in the first wave at Tinian. He was horribly wounded. That's the island we took for the dropping of the atomic bomb. He was a tough man. Brave man. I never heard a cuss word come from his mouth the whole time I grew up. I never heard him once say a negative word about the Japanese or any other race. He was a loving man. But growing up, he never told me he loved me. I never had a doubt. He was of the old guard that just didn't say it. Till I was a junior in college, so I was about your age. He came and put his arm around me and looked at me. And he said to me, Jerry, I love you. How do you think I responded? Do you think I said, well, it's about time you told me? Think I stomped away? No, you know exactly what I did. My eyes welled up with tears. If I talk about it much, I'll get misty-eyed now. And I said, Dad, I love you too. We never had a conversation after that where we didn't tell each other we loved each other till the day he died. And I also found, understanding that he loved me, I was coming home on weekends from college when I wasn't playing a sport and stuff. I'd come home to help him rake the leaves, mow the lawn, wash the car. And while I was doing that, I thought to myself, I could have come home to rake the leaves, wash the car, and mow the lawn and stuff in order to get him to love me. Or knowing he loved me, I could have come home, raked the leaves, mowed the lawn, and washed the car. Same act, but an eternal difference in motivation. You could be sharing Christ because you're afraid that if you don't, that's not good for you. Or you could not share Christ because you're afraid. Or you could say, wait a minute, I understand. He loves me. And he wants to mediate his grace and love through me to other people. And all of a sudden, transformation begins to follow. I don't know about you, but I think it's great. And I think to live in fear, then when we share Christ, shows that fundamentally we're not recognizing that he loves us. Don't beat yourself up if you discover that, but don't leave it like that. Change. So C.S. Lewis, most of my academic life's on C.S. Lewis. I got 7 books I've written about C.S. Lewis and so on, and nobody buys them. The only people who buy my books are anesthesiologists, because they found out they're cheaper to prescribe than drugs and hold people in a deeper sleep longer, But never, and my students, they used to have to buy them because they coerced them into it. Now I don't teach, so nobody buys my books anymore. But nevertheless, I've been studying Lewis for 53 years. I've been teaching him for 43 years. I've lectured on him in 81 universities in 19 different countries. I like this guy. I read the books not only he wrote, but the books that he talks about in his books as well. My mind is like a pickle soaking in the brine of C.S. Lewis. But I don't always agree with him. He wrote something in Mere Christianity, the book you're reading, that I disagree with. He said in that book, he thought pride was the great sin. I disagree with that. St. Augustine, in his commentary on Psalm 19, he said he thought pride was the great sin. So if Lewis and Augustine say they think pride's a great sin, and I disagree with them, I'm probably wrong. But bear with me and let me see if I can make a case, all right? If they would have said they thought pride was at the apex of a process, and therefore it was the greatest, like the apex of a pyramid, I can put it here. Like the apex of a pyramid is the greatest point of the pyramid. That would make sense to me. I could sign on, but it would mean there would be things far more substantive as you move down the pyramid. And when I talk about pride, I'm not talking about pride of it that you take in a job well done. People were looking to you to do something, you held up your side of the bargain and you did it. Or pride you take when a friend of yours does something well. I'm talking about that form of pride that tries to make itself look better than it really is. Pretense. If I'm right and pride is at the top of the pyramid, what's before pride? What would be beneath it? When you find yourself getting a little pretentious, what usually are you masking? Huh? Yeah? Insecurity or fear. Right? So insecurity or fear. If that's true, then I think that's going to strongly suggest what might be at the base of the pyramid. 1 John 4:18 says, perfect love casts out fear. Perfect love. I think there's a corollary to that. Imperfect love produces anxiety. I don't think I've ever been loved perfectly by anybody, any human. And the way I think that is because I'm convinced I've never loved another person perfectly. And somehow all of us are going through life burdening one another with a sense of anxiety, saddling them up with anxiety. There's only one person who loves perfectly. And oh people, he loves you. He loves you with a perfect love that casts out fear. And you don't have to find your security in what other people think about you. You don't even have to find your security in what you think about yourself in a given moment. He loves you. And I think at the base of the pyramid is to live in neglect of his love. I'm going to try and illustrate it. There was a movie I saw on an airplane once. And at the end of the movie, I started crying. I don't usually do this. I'm a high T on the Myers-Briggs. I'm a thinker. I live in my head. But in this case, I got real misty. C.S. Lewis said, if you read a book and you find yourself getting moved by that book, don't analyze the book at that minute. Finish the book first and then go back and try and figure out what was it about that book that touched you. So I watch the rest of the movie and I go back and I'm thinking to myself, what was it about that scene where I really lost it? So what was the movie? It was a movie called The Notebook. Everybody laughs when I say that because it's a chick flick, right?
Well, yes. I guess not a lot of guys like it.
Huh?
Not a lot of guys like it.
Not a lot of guys like it because they're insecure. They've neglected God's love, you see. No. I want you to know I'm secure enough in my masculinity I can watch a chick flick and I'll be okay. All right? But here was the scene. How many of you saw the movie? How many of you did not see the movie? Okay, I'm going to rehearse it for you what happened. Okay. The movie starts off with this old guy, played by James Garner, and he walks into a memory care unit at a hospital, and he starts to read a story to a woman, and she's very standoffish, and you realize she has dementia. The orderly has to say, it's okay, he comes and reads stories here every day. The impression is this old man goes to memory care hospital in his retirement, reads stories to the old folks. And the whole movie is present time with James Garner reading the story to this old woman played by Gina Rowlands, and flashback to the time when the story occurs. And it occurs in a small village on a lake not far from Charleston, South Carolina. There's a young boy who lives in that village. There's a young girl who comes with her parents to vacation at that village for the summer. Impression, she comes from wealth. The boy, they can vacation a city for a village for a summer. The boy who grew up there, he comes from poverty. He has a high school diploma, and he likes reading. He likes reading the poetry of Walt Whitman and stuff like that. She has the best education her parents can afford. There's so much that counts against any kind of relationship ever occurring here. But some sort of romance begins to emerge. She comes from a family intact, mother, father, daughter. We don't know where his mother is. We don't know if she abandoned the family or if she died, but there's clearly been sadness there. And so many things distract from any kind of relationship emerging between these two. And all of a sudden, the girl's parents find out some relationship is developing, and they want to get their daughter out of that town because they've got plans for her. And he's not part of them. So they're pulling out of town, and she's weeping in the car. He's chasing after the car, crying also, and yells out to her, "I'll write to you every day." And the mother hears that. And every day, she's there at the mailbox getting the letter before her daughter can get it. More counting against that relationship developing. Then World War II breaks out. And now circumstance and distance causes them to be further separated. And it's at that moment that you realize it's this old man and this old woman's story. And he comes every day to the hospital to read them the story of how they fell in love.
That's so sad.
What's that?
Me too.
But here's the point. Here's where I lost it. After he's been reading the story to her all day, the flashbacks and everything, there's a scene in the hospital where he's having a nice dinner with her. Instead of a Formica table in the hospital, they have a tablecloth on the table. There's a rose and a bud vase. There's a candle burning. There's a record player playing all the music that had informed them of their relationship. And the whole environment is pulsating out to this woman the love of this man for her. And he finishes the story. And she says, that's the most beautiful story, love story I have ever heard. And it sounds so familiar. And in that moment, she comes into cognition. And she says, it's our story, isn't it? And he says, yes. She says, how much time do we have? He says, last time it was only 5 minutes. She says, how are the children? That's a question a mother would ask, isn't it? So they're fine. They came to see you today. She says, tell them I love them. And the music is playing, and she says, hold me. Can we dance? And they begin to dance across that hospital floor. And as quickly as she came into cognition, she falls out of cognition, finds herself in the arms of a stranger, and starts to scream. The orderlies have to come in to sedate her. And James Garner's character is standing there, biting his knuckle, weeping, and I lost it. Why did I lose it? And after the movie was over, I'm trying to evaluate what it was, and it dawned on me. This is all of our story. We're all part of this incredible love relationship. And we live most of our lives as if we have dementia. We live as if it doesn't matter. And all of a sudden there come those moments where we come into cognition, like maybe you are right now. And the thing that's remarkable to me about it is we fall into awareness, and then some little inconvenience happens. Some difficulty occurs. And as quickly as we come into cognition, we fall out of cognition, and we forget how deeply he loves us. And when I saw James Garner's character biting his knuckle, weeping, I thought that's a window to the very heart of God, who loves us so completely and wants us to know it so thoroughly and wants us to be ambassadors of it to others around us. That's where evangelism has to begin, at that particular place. Does that make sense? So I also want you to know this. Throughout the scriptures, a mark of spiritual maturity is we come to the place where we're telling other people about him. There are a lot of things that contribute to our spiritual maturity. You do devotions. I was impressed when I saw you guys going off this morning, reading your Bibles for yourself. We pray. We read the scriptures. We learn to give. We cultivate magnanimity. We'll talk about some of those things on Thursday. We learn how to walk in the Spirit. That's important. We'll talk about that too this week. But the capstone of spiritual maturity is that we're sharing our faith with other people. If you read in the Bible, you'll find, especially in the book of Jude and in 2 Peter, that the apostates who can sometimes creep into the church, 1 John 2:18, you have heard that Antichrist is coming. I tell you, many Antichrists have already come. And then it says 2:19, they went out from us. They were in the church. They went out from us. You get to the Jude passage and it says of the apostates who get into the church, they're autumn trees without fruit. They have all the look of being the real deal, but there's no fruit. They're hidden reefs. People get shipwrecked on hidden reefs. They're clouds without rain. In an agrarian society, no rain, no crops. Church is full of people who are in positions of leadership who have never led anybody to Christ. Some of them, it's because nobody ever taught them. They're good-hearted. They mean well. But there are some who can creep in there. If bearing fruit is not a value of your church, all kinds of people can get into leadership positions. You want to keep them out? Show me your fruit. Jesus said in John 15, abide in me and what? Bear much fruit. The mark that we're abiding should come out in fruit bearing. And it's not just fruit of the Spirit, that's also important. But it's the fruit bearing of leading people to Christ, because it says in 1 John 15:16, you did not choose me, but I chose you that you might go and bear fruit. It's fruit bearing out there, not fruit bearing in here. This is important too. And consequently, I think that churches should have as a standard not only the qualities of leadership listed in Titus and Timothy, but they should have as a standard the people in leadership here have to show that they've been able to lead somebody to Christ and disciple them so that person could go lead somebody to Christ. And if you can't do that, you may be perfect for leadership at this church one day. But let us encourage you and mentor you so that you could go do that and then come back and you could be a leader in this church. But if we don't do that, we're basically encouraging fruitlessness. So as we look at this, we did statistics at the Billy Graham Center at Wheaton College. 78% of non-Christians in America would say they would listen to a spiritual conversation if a friend they knew brought up the subject. And yet we found that 32% of Americans who are Christians didn't even have a spiritual conversation with a non-Christian in the last year. More people out there that want to know than we're willing to tell. I know there's more people out there. Jesus said the fields are white unto harvest. He said the problem isn't with the harvest. The problem is there aren't enough people willing to go. Which means I think there aren't enough people who know how overwhelmingly they are loved by God that they can be ambassadors of that love for others. You've got this reverberating throughout Scripture. Maturation is at its fullness when there's fruit bearing. Dawson Trotman, who founded, how much time do we have before we have to go to Q&A? Huh? So Dawson Trotman, who founded the Navigators, he spoke here at Hume once, actually. Founded the Navigators, that ministry like Campus Crusade or InterVarsity. It was a student ministry. He preached a sermon once, maybe even preached it here at Hume. It was called Born to Reproduce. And he said a person was physiologically mature when they could reproduce physiologically. And a person is spiritually mature when that person could reproduce spiritually. So I met a man once named David Morgan, and he used to travel around America preaching with Dawson Trotman. And I said, tell me Trotman stories. And he told me this one. He was there. He saw this happen. So I was at a church in the Pacific Northwest. I can't remember if it was Portland or Seattle. Large church. It was in the 1950s, a much more formal era than now. And Trotman had been invited to preach at the church pastored by a guy he had led to Christ and discipled. Pastor introduced him that way. Trotman gets in the pulpit and he says, it's true. I had the privilege of leading your pastor to Christ and discipling him. That's why I'm not afraid to do what I'm going to do right now. He calls the pastor back to his side and says, point me to somebody in this congregation you led to Christ and discipled. Imagine it. The pastor points back to the back to Matt. And Trotman says, Matt, stand up. Point me to somebody in this congregation you led to Christ and discipled. He points over to Richard. Richard, stand up. Point me to somebody in this congregation you led to Christ and discipled. He points over to Sylvia. Sylvia, stand up. Point me to somebody in this congregation you led to Christ and discipled. And it went like that, David Morgan said, for 7 generations. Imagine it. I just gasped when I heard that. I said, that's extraordinary. There's a tragedy. The normative has become the extraordinary in the church today. We need to restore the normative. And when you leave this place, may you be an agent for change. Don't go to your church and say, hey, how many of people on this board have led people to Christ? Don't be obnoxious. That's not going to bring about change. But bring about the change lovingly, encouragingly. Talk to the pastor about it. Say, is there a way we could do this where in the future, when you get new leaders, there are leaders who have led people to Christ and discipled them? And are you willing as a pastor to train your own congregation, your own leadership, how to do this? And if you don't know how, don't beat yourself up. But if nobody's ever taught you, you learn by your mistakes. You go learn. And all the way through Scripture, you've got this. And here's the one that I want to bring us to then, Philemon 6, which is one of the outstanding verses on this very point. Philemon 6, I'm going to recite it to you from the NIV 1984. Now, I'm in my finishing my 56th read through the whole Bible. I've read the New Testament 42 times besides that, and the Greek Bible twice. I'm in my third read through the Greek Bible. And I know translators of many of the English versions we use today. ESV, I know translators on it. NIV, I know translators on there. NASV, I know translators who are on that one. Today's English version, I know translators. I know them. And they're all pretty good. But the one that I think is best on this verse, Philemon 6, is the NIV 1984. I've translated it myself. And here's what it says. I pray that you will be active in sharing your faith so that you will have a full understanding of every good thing we have in Christ Jesus. I pray that you will be active in sharing your faith so that you will have a full understanding of everything, good thing we have in Christ Jesus. The phrase full understanding, it's one word in the Greek. It's epigenosko. It's the most intimate word for knowledge in the Bible. We use it to speak of the carnal relationship between a husband and wife. They know each other. There's an intimacy with God you will not know if you're not involved in His heart for the world. If you abide in Christ, we would expect that eventually abiding in Him, your heart would begin to break with the things His heart breaks for. Your heart would be inclined to engage in the kind of activities His heart is engaged with. So how will you grow? If this is true, how will you grow? We could probably come up with 5,000 ways. Let me just give you three. 3 ways. All right? Number 1, I think we'll grow because people will ask us questions and we won't know the answers. I've talked with people before who say, I don't want to share the faith because people might ask me questions and I won't know how to answer them. I'll feel responsible for them and so on. No question anybody asks you that you don't know the answer to stops the conversation. It only puts a pause on it. It gives you the opportunity to go dig for the answer, and you can come back whenever you find a substantive answer. I don't think we ever come to the bottom of any of these questions, but we can come with substantive answers, significant answers. It gives you the opportunity to go back and say to that person, hey, do you remember the other day when you said this to me? You asked this question? I didn't know the answer, but I've been digging because you matter to me. I wasn't going to leave a stone unturned till I found out something that would be helpful. And I'd love to share with you what I found. They have to let you because they were the ones that asked the question and you were responsible with them. And I can't tell you the number of times I've come back with answers to questions and the person came to faith. I can't tell you the number of times I've come back with answers and they just asked another question. But that was okay because I got to take that question and dig for answers. And the more I dug, the more I grew, and the more I found that this whole Christian thing is really cool. I'm embarrassed to say this, but I remember very early on people would say to me, I don't want anything to do with God because if God's good and all-powerful, why is there evil in the universe? Have you ever heard that question? I never even asked that question before I was a Christian. Never even crossed my mind. But my non-Christian friends were asking, I go, that's a great question. I've since written a book on it. It's a matter that concerns me. But the deal is, it was my friends who weren't Christians asking those questions who helped me dig deeper, and I started growing. That's one way you'll grow. As a matter of fact, you also learn not to be afraid of questions. If you have no questions about your faith, you're delusional. You think you've achieved omniscience. Don't be afraid of questions. Don't be afraid of digging for answers and grow. Second, we're going to grow because people are going to scrutinize our lives. How often it is that our lives don't measure up. And our friends will point that out. So I'll really let down my guard with you, okay? I became a Christian my freshman year, and I made it my goal to share Christ with every guy I played football with in college. When I became a Christian, we had a football team of 102, and there were only 2 of us who were Christians. And I saw about 15 guys a year come to faith. I saw about 60 guys I played football with come to faith, and a bunch of wrestlers I wrestled with came to faith, and so on. Did I make mistakes? Boatloads. And I'll tell you about one. Okay? So there was a fraternity on my campus, and it was all athletes. So I decided to pledge that fraternity. And I get into the fraternity, and while you're going through all the pledges and hazing stuff, guys are urinating on me. And I go, what's this? I grew up in South Central. You think this is bad? This is nothing. No big deal. Now I'm an active member of the fraternity, and I'm a Christian. And the new pledge class is coming in. I'm talking to him about Jesus over here and urinating on him over here, and I saw no incongruity in that whatsoever. These guys get in the pledge class, and you know what they tell me? They get into that, they become active members, and they said, we can't call you Brother Jerry, and we have no clue how you can call yourself a Christian. And they were right. And I had to thank them. And I said, Lord, you got to take this deeper in my life than it is right now. I want to discover some of the transforming power of your gospel to change me at some of these deeper levels. Of those guys that criticized me, 3 of them I led to Christ before I graduated. But it took a couple of years for them to see the changes. And a year ago, March, my old fraternity, they all got together and invited me to talk about Jesus to them, and only maybe 20% of them were Christians. And they asked me to come back. And the guy that was most hostile towards me that time, I can't call you brother, I don't know how you call yourself a Christian. He was there. I said, Kim, I still remember what you told me 50 years ago. And it cut me to the quick. And what you spoke was truth into my life. And it has helped me. And you helped me grow in faith. And I am grateful to you. People will scrutinize your life. They want to know if what you're saying matches what you're living. And sometimes you can't get that unless you're out there where people want to know if it's for real. And you learn from that, and you grow, and you gain credit when you share. And you learn how to deflect on certain judgments. How many of you have heard people say, I don't want anything to do with Christianity, there's too many hypocrites in the church? Have you heard that one before? You know what I say to a person who says that to me? I say, tell me your story. How did you discover that? You sound like a person who's been wounded before. And they tell me their story. And I say, you know what? I think you're right. I think it's perceptive of you. I think there are hypocrites in the church. You know how I know? They say, no, how? I say, I believe in the high ideal of love. But there have been times I've had sharp words with people I say I love the most. I believe in justice, but there have been times when I've been unfair in my treatment of another person. No, I know you're right. I know there's hypocrites in the church, and I'm sad that you have been hurt. I'm a Christian. Let me stand as a surrogate in the place of the one who hurts you. And will you allow me to ask you for forgiveness? And it's amazing how all of a sudden the hostility drops and the relevance of the gospel becomes front and center. And I'll give you an example of it. My best friend had an exchange student stay with him. This was years ago. She was from Germany. And her parents, over the year, she became a Christian. And her parents were coming to pick her up. And my best friend thought, uh-oh, what are they going to think when they pick up their daughter and she's become a Christian? So he said, would you go to dinner with us when her parents come? I said, sure. So I'm sitting next to the dad. And I said, you're from Germany. Where are you from in Germany? And he said, I'm from Dresden. Do any of you know about the bombing of Dresden in World War II? The war was almost over. Berlin was almost surrounded. And we bombed Dresden. There were people fleeing the Russian army coming towards Berlin. They had arrived at Dresden. We don't know how many were killed, but the estimates are 70,000. As many as died in Hiroshima died at the bombing of Dresden, and it wasn't necessary. Now, I didn't live then. I didn't have my friends being slaughtered next to me in a battlefield. I don't know what the emotion was that people were involved with then. I'm not trying to make excuses for them, but I'm saying it's complex. But nevertheless, the bombing of Dresden was wrong. And this guy said he was from Dresden, the father of the girl who had become a Christian. And I said to him, Dresden? He said, yeah. I said, has any American ever told you that the bombing of Dresden was wrong? Would you forgive us for that? And he started crying. He said, I wish my dad could hear you say that. I have no memory of my father without his being bitter about the bombing of Dresden. I said, is he still living? He said, yes. I said, would you pass on my words to him? He said, I will. And then he said to me, has any German ever said to you, the invasion of Poland on September 1st, 1939 was wrong? The event that triggered World War II. Has any German told you it was wrong? Will you forgive us for that? And all of a sudden, the whole conversation came down to the importance of forgiveness and the relevancy of forgiveness, to leach away bitterness, to open the door to wholeness, and to turn us towards the one who ultimately can start that process because he forgave us at Calvary. We share our faith, people scrutinize our life. If we listen, it will bring us to greater tenderness and greater authenticity when we share. The last area that will help us grow is we'll keep seeing Jesus showing up in our life. We'll keep seeing Jesus show up. Oh, by the way, one other thing about scrutinize our life. I knew a man once who told me, I would never put a Christian bumper sticker on my car. If I did that, I'd have to drive better. You share your faith, you got to live better. Okay, but the last one is you keep seeing Jesus show up. I had students all the time that say, I just want Jesus to show up in my life. I said, you go show up where he's working. You can know a person for years at your church and maybe not really get to know them until you see them in their workplace. We have all kinds of people who know God at church, but they've never been in his workplace. They've never been involved in the work he's doing in the world. And this becomes extremely important to us. Get to know him in his workplace. Now, and you see him show up, and it's unbelievable. Not a week goes by where I don't have a deep spiritual conversation with somebody and often lead people to Christ. Doesn't always go well. I'll talk more about that later. But 2 years ago, I don't know if I can even confess this in front of you guys because you'll probably not listen to me anymore. I'm a pipe smoker. I'm a C.S. Lewis fan. What would you expect? I'm a pipe smoker. I also drink single malt scotch. No more than a thumb's width. I haven't had a buzz since high school. Before I was a Christian, I don't drink like that. And I love single malt scotch. There's 140 distilleries in Scotland, and I've had scotch from 107 of those distilleries. And I had a bunch of friends who wanted to go to Islay, and I went with them this year. But 2 years before, I was teaching a class in Ireland. And it was a 2-week class, and I had a weekend free, and I said to my wife, I'd love to go to Islay, because Islay in Scotland is where the best scotch is from. And you could get a ferry from Northern Ireland, and it only takes an hour and a half to get across that body of water. And the ferry was going to go and be there for 6 hours and then go back to Ireland, and we had to be on the return ferry or we weren't going to be able to be there for the school where I was teaching. So we take the ferry across and we get off, and I'm thinking we'll get a taxi, we'll go see a couple of the distilleries anyway. And I asked this fisherman who's getting out of his boat, he just happened to be there, are there taxis on this island? He says, yeah, but they're all on the other end. There's a big wedding there today. I said, well, do people frown on you if you hitchhike on this island? Is that doable? He says, where do you want to go? I said, well, I was hoping I could get to a couple of the distilleries before the ferry goes back. He said, I'll take you. So we get in his car, and he takes us to Lefroy, this first one. It's about 2 miles up the road from this little place where his boat was, his fishing boat was. And they're getting ready to have a tour. He says, don't go on their tour. They charge too much. Come on with me, I'll show you. And he walks us in. And everybody says, hey, Donald, how are you? Hi, Donald, how are you? His son's one of the distillers. We go through there, and he says, okay, let's go to the next one. So we go up to Lagavulin. And we do that one. And then after that, he says, okay, let's go to Ardbeg. And now we're starting back to go to the boat. And I said, can we buy you lunch? He says, no. Can we fill your car with gas? No. This is the way we people are on this island. I said, what do you like? He said, I like books of quotes. I produced a book called The Quotable C.S. Lewis. It's 500 pages long. It takes quotes from every one of his books. I said, I'll send you a book of quotes. So I sent him the Quotable Lewis, never heard back from him. Donald Holyoke. So this year, I never thought I'd go back to that island. I go back to that island. And when I go back to that island, one of the guys I was with, there were 4 of us who were on this tour, one of them had arranged a boat ride on the outside, the boat side of all these distilleries. And we get back to where the dock is, and I said to the boat driver, there's a guy who's a fisherman here. And he showed me around the distilleries 2 years ago. And I didn't know what I could do for him, and he said he liked quotes. So I sent him a quote book. He says, are you the guy that sent Donald Holyoke the Quotable C.S. Lewis? I go, how do you know that? He said, he told me all about it. I said, I'd love to see him. He says, I know he'd like to see you too. This guy calls him, and Holyoke comes down to the dock. And he says, you know, I got that book from you, Jerry. And I've been reading in it. It's got me thinking about God. I think I want God in my life. And I shared the gospel with him on that dock. And Donald Holyoke gave his heart to Jesus that day. This is an event that took place 1986 to 1990 when I put that book together. It's an event that took place 2 years before I led him to Christ, when we met, just happened to meet, just a coincidence. Don't let it build your faith. Wasn't a coincidence. God was in every detail. I never thought I'd go back to that island. There he is, and he comes to faith on that island. We're doing follow-up now on emails and stuff. God shows up in your life in ways that is so affirming to your faith that it blows you away. And when you go through a bad time where you have a little bit of dementia, don't worry about it. You'll get past that because he'll show up in those places too. Okay, any questions? Too late for abridgments. We'll talk tomorrow about details about how you can do it, about how you can share your faith, specifics and so on. But she had her hand up first. First name again?
Ruth.
Ruth. Yeah. And I asked her if she had a boyfriend. She said no. And I said, I have a grandson named Boaz, and he's and he is ruthless. He's ruthless. But he's only 12, and she didn't want to wait that long. Anyway, okay, Ruth.
Okay. So do you think we should evangelize to people we have a relationship with already, or should we evangelize to total strangers as well?
I think we can do all of it, and I'll explain to you how tomorrow.
Okay.
Because I think there's contact evangelism, you've never met the person. Context evangelism, you've been thrown together in a context, maybe you know them a little bit, maybe you don't. But maybe you're next to them on an airplane, or maybe you work with them at work, or they're a neighbor next door to you. And then there's friendship evangelism is a whole different ball game. Event evangelism is a whole different event. I'll talk about those tomorrow. Is that good?
That sounds good.
All right, so can you wait?
Yes.
But you wouldn't wait for Boaz? Your patience is not universally applied.
I'll work on it.
Selective patience. Okay, let's see. Somebody else had a hand up. Yeah, Isaac.
That guy,
Say it again.
did the man who you gave the quote book to, and his friend that found out, did he get saved as well, or was he already a Christian?
No, the boat driver
Yeah.
that called up Donald so he'd come down to the dock so I could talk with him.
Yeah.
I don't know where he was at. He called him. I was grateful. We didn't have that level of conversation, but Donald Holyoke had another friend he brought with him, and I was able to share with that friend too. I don't know if that guy's come to Christ, but Donald's concerned about him, and he's trying to share with him. It's interesting, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. The Apostle Paul, he comes to faith, dramatic conversion on the Damascus Road. What happens to him? God says, I want you to be my witness. And he right there at Damascus, he starts sharing with people. He gets in so much trouble, they have to let him down a basket over the wall. How about the guy, this is Jesus' follow-up method. The guy who's a demoniac at the tubes. Jesus changes his life. The guy wants to go with him. What's Jesus' follow-up method? Nope, you can't go with me. Go tell the people in your family. And he went to Decapolis, 10 villages, and told people about him. Jesus' follow-up method, you start sharing your faith, and you'll start to grow because people ask you questions, people scrutinize your life, they want to know if it's a real thing. One of the best things you could do is start getting people sharing their faith right away. I'll talk about that on Thursday. Okay? You had a question? Say your name again, real loud, because I can't hear very well. Cassie? Okay, hold on. I'm going to come back there because I can't hardly hear your voice. Okay, Cassie.
What was your biggest impact on writing the book?
Say it again.
What was your biggest impact on writing your book?
Was it the biggest impact?
Yeah, on writing
On me or on people who have read it?
Why did you decide to write your book?
Say it again.
Why did you decide to write your book?
Why did I decide to write it?
Yeah.
One, I was intensely interested in the subjects I wrote about. That was one. So again, you share faith out of your love for God. If you're sharing for any other reason, it'll probably atrophy your interest. But if you have passion about it, the passion will keep you going. So I wrote because I was passionate about these subjects. But also I'm a professor. And they say it's publish or perish in the professor world. And the reason why is because when you go to college, you pay a lot of money for your education, and you don't want it taught from a teacher's old yellowed notes who's not on the stretch and not growing, not keeping up on his discipline. So the way a professor can show that they're on the stretch is that they're producing books, they're reading papers at academic gatherings and so on, and they're putting their stuff out there, and they're letting people take shots at them. You know, and so they're strengthening their arguments because they know what the criticisms are, and they try to then answer those criticisms so their argument becomes stronger. So that's what led me. Why? Do you want to write a book? You could write one about Ruth and Boaz.
Oh my gosh.
But you have interest? You asked the question. It's interesting to me you asked that question.
I've written a couple books, but not.
Beg your pardon?
Sorry, I need to feel it. I've written a couple books.
Here, wait a second. Here's a cough drop.
I need my inhaler. But yeah, nothing.
How many of you are interested in writing one day? What you need to do if you're interested is start writing. First off, you should read well, read a lot, fill your mind and heart, and then start writing. Find some people who could critique you. I'm in 2 writing groups where people critique my writing as I write. And then also, besides that, start sending stuff off. How many of you ever went to a dentist's office or a doctor's office and you saw Highlights magazine or Jack and Jill magazine when you were a little kid? And you remember the little stories in there? They publish stuff all the time. You could send something off, a story for one of those magazines, to one of those magazines. You get your name published and you go, wow, I can do this, I can publish. Sometimes publishers want to know what have you written, and if you've got a few things you've already published, that opens the doors for you to publish more. But you could start by sending stuff off to some places like that. Or maybe what church do you go to? What kind of church?
Me?
Yeah. Huh?
What do you mean? Like what kind of church?
What denomination is?
Oh, non-denominational.
But are they affiliated with any other group or anything?
No, I don't know.
Sometimes you can find churches that are affiliated and they have a church magazine. And you're writing about your experiences maybe growing in Christ at Joshua. And they would publish that because it's a testimonial thing for those magazines. You can find church magazines that'll do that. Maybe, I don't know, does Hume have a magazine? You can write something and give it to whoever the editor is and see if they'll take it. And if they won't, say, does it have merit? What would I need to do to have it have merit? Maybe you do 3 or 4 or 5 drafts. But finally it gets published and you see your name in print. It's kind of encouraging. And then you do more. There's also a book, if you're interested in writing, it used to come out every year and you get it hardbound. Now it's online and you have to pay for it online. Do you know the book I'm talking about?
One's to mind, but I can't come up with the name.
It's called Writer's Market. Writer's Market. They have another one called Poet's Market, if you write poetry. They will tell you the name of every reputable publisher in North America. They will tell you who their acquisitions editor is, so you're not just writing it randomly and it gets stuck in some mailbox someplace. You're writing to the specific person. It gives you their name, contact, and everything. It tells you what kind of books they publish. If they publish 400 books, the likelihood of you publishing is higher than a publisher who only publishes 5 a year. And also, it tells you the kind of books they publish. If you're writing a book in this area and you're sending it to a publisher who doesn't even publish those kinds of books, you're wasting your time. And then also, it will tell you how to submit a manuscript. Will they take it by writing a query letter? You say what you're writing about. You talk a little bit about yourself, say know who you are, what you have to say. Or do they take a query letter with a sample chapter? Or do they not take anything unless you have an agent? At the end of the book, it tells you how to get an agent. So Writer's Market, Poet's Market's another one. How many of you are photographers? There's one called Photographer's Market too. Anyway, any other questions? Yeah. First name?
April.
April.
Yeah. Do you think that Wheaton College is still worth going to even after you left?
Do you think what?
Wheaton College is still worth going to even after you left?
I do. Some of my closest friends in the world teach there. And they are some of the deepest Christians I know. And some of the most lovely people I know. And I would go there just to study with them. And the other thing too, it's interesting to me, I've lectured not just on C.S. Lewis, but on other topics, evangelism, spiritual formation, at probably 70 of the 148 CCCU schools, Council for Christian Colleges and Universities, probably about 70 of them. I've been overwhelmed with how good they are. And I've also been overwhelmed by the fact that almost all of them have a prof or two who's gotten in, who's a jerk. And jerks get in places. And jerks make a lot of noise. And people hear what the jerk says and judge the whole institution by virtue of the jerk. And then they go speak bad about that school. And they don't know what they're talking about because they only have experience with this jerk. All elephants walk in a single file line, at least the one I saw did. I can't make a judgment about how elephants walk if I've seen one walk. But people will do that. Plus, they'll tell me about, oh, this guy's teaching over at this school and they're a jerk. And I say, so how did it go when you talk with them? Well, I didn't talk with them. Well, how'd you find out they were a jerk? Well, this person over here told me. And I go, so you got it hearsay from that person? Did you know hearsay doesn't stand up in a court of law? And you're judging that institution by virtue of hearsay? That means then you're a gossip. So why should a person listen to you if you're a gossip when you won't tell people don't go to that college because there's a jerk there? It gets complex, doesn't it, all of a sudden? So I know I've had these conversations, and it's tough. And there are going to be people who are going to get in. But even Jesus had one who got in, you know? So I think you want to judge the school by virtue of what people you know. If you have friends who've gone to the school, I can tell you Wheaton is a good bang for your buck. It's one of the best schools. I think it's the #1 Christian school in America with one possible rival. It's called Biola University. And I've taught there too for 32 years as a visiting professor. But Biola is those are probably the two best. But there are others that are worth looking at. Lots of others. I talked to somebody here who went to Point Loma. Who was that? Huh? I don't remember who it was. Was it you? No? Huh? Oh yeah, Tanner. And then also George Fox is coming up. Gordon's still a good bang for your buck. Taylor University is really worth looking into. You know one of the best surprises is College of the Ozarks. It's called Hard Work U. No student graduates with debt. And every student has to work 1 day a week. So consequently, they don't have food service, they don't have cleaning service, they don't have yard service. Every student puts in 1 day working in that. They have some people they've hired full time to oversee that management, and you work off your tuition. You don't graduate with debt. And they have a $500 million endowment. And I've been there, I've lectured there. They have incredible faculty. And have you ever heard of it? No, College of the Ozarks. It's a really good one. You know Margaret Thatcher? She used to be the Prime Minister of England. She lectured there. Yeah, it's crazy. Huh?
I was going to say Mrs. Thatcher.
Say it again?
I was saying Mrs. Thatcher.
Mrs. Thatcher? Margaret Thatcher. Didn't I say Margaret Thatcher?
Yeah.
Should I have said Mrs.?
No. I just have a question. Do you think, would you recommend Christian colleges for everyone? Because I know.
Say it again?
Would you recommend going to Christian college for most Christians, or would you say
Yeah, it all depends. I don't think there's one size that fits all. So I've worked with college students virtually all my adult life. And I've seen 4 scenarios. If I can generalize this, I'm sure there's nuances that are even more than those 4. But number 1, I've seen Christian kids who went to a Christian college and flourished. I've seen Christian kids who went to a Christian college and they got upset about something and they got bitter and they went south. I've seen Christian kids who went to a secular college and they got caught up in the lifestyle and they went south. I've seen Christian kids who went to a secular college who were bold for Jesus and grew by leaps and bounds. So you got 4 examples. It's no guarantee if you go to one or the other how you're going to come out. But it has an awful lot to do with what's going on inside of you. And you've been to Joshua, so you're building good habits. That's a positive. Yeah. I'll give you another example about changing culture. So when I was living above the mortuary, the guy that was the captain of the football team, didn't I tell you about living above the mortuary? No. Oh. Well, we'll save that for another time. But 2 of my roommates in college, one was captain of the football team, one was captain of the wrestling team. And we're still good friends. The guy, especially the guy that was captain of the football team, we'd talk every week. And we went to a secular school. By the time I graduated from college, I'd already read through my Bible from cover to cover 4 times. For us, it was a lifeline. You know, but I was at Whittier College, it was real close to Biola. And a lot of the kids at Biola, they were reading their Bible, but they were reading it for assignments a lot of times. And they'd say, well, I'm pretty busy, so I'll just check that and let that be my quiet time for today. But they were reading it as a textbook, not as a thing for their soul. That wasn't true of all, but it was true of some. But nevertheless, we didn't know jack squat about the Bible. We were reading it, but we weren't being trained how to interpret it. We weren't trained on how to understand it more deeply. These Biola kids had that. But because we were at a secular college, we were sharing Jesus with people every week. So they had a Bible study. There was a bunch of Biola students. And we decided we wanted to go there. Gary, Chris, and myself. We wanted to go there. And the teaching was incredible. The music and worship was incredible. And then it came to the prayer time. And somebody said, you know what? Pray for my dog. My dog's sick. Another one said, you know what? Pray that I can find my keys. Another one said, pray for my Aunt Gertrude. She lives in Freeport, Maine, and she's going to have gallbladder surgery this week. And I'm looking at my roommates, and I go, the world's going to hell, and we're praying for sick dogs and lost keys. Come on. So my roommates and I decided we weren't going to in any way say negative things, just like you don't say negative things to your board. You instead work positively to bring about change. So we decided that every week we were going to ask prayer requests for somebody we were sharing Christ with. So the next week we went, great Bible study, great music, prayer time. I said, you know what, could you please pray for me? There's a guy, his name's Bob, and he works at the checkout clerk at this liquor deli store where I buy groceries. It's right by my house. And I've been talking with him casually. Please pray I can go deeper with him. Then Chris said, please pray for me. There's a guy on the football team I'm talking with. Gary said, please pray for me. There's a guy in my fraternity I'm talking with. And then it went back to sick dog, Aunt Gertrude, and the lost keys. So the next week, I say, hey, remember I asked you to pray for Bob? I've got an appointment with him this week. Please pray for Bob. I'm going to be talking to him about Jesus. Chris says, please pray for this person I'm talking to. Gary says, please pray for this person I'm talking to. And that third week, I think, it was by the third week, somebody said, you know what? I've got somebody I'm talking to, too. Please pray for them. And then it was a sick dog, and so on. That dog is going to die soon, I think. So then, about the fifth week, I said, hey, you guys, you know I've been asking you to pray for Bob? Bob, these are the guys I said were praying for you. Tell them what happened to you this week. And he said, I asked Jesus in my heart. And that place exploded. And everybody thought, there's bigger fish to fry in this world. We never shamed anybody. We never told people they needed to do this. We just tried to model it and watch the culture change. Does that make sense? Yeah, that's cool. Cool. Any other questions? Okay. Thanks.